In this unit of our InDesign CS6 course, we're going to talk about the Notes layout, the Track Changes layout, and the Story Editor display layout underneath our Preferences dialog box. Let's begin with the Notes layout first. Adobe InDesign CS6 allows you to place notes, kind of an overlay of your InDesign document, using this Notes tool over here in the Tools panel. The options that we have available for us is, first of all, selecting a color for our user. You'll notice, just as we have in other options, we've got all types of colors that we can choose. We'll use the default user color of a bright orange for that. Beneath that, we have a series of checkboxes. One of them is to show note tooltips. So for example, if I go over here and I work with the Note tool, I got a little bit of a flash there because the Preferences dialog box is going to override all other options when it's open. But when I clicked on the button, it actually allowed me to select that Note tool and show the tooltips. If I want to, I can turn that off. And with notes that we can apply in Story Editor, we can include note content when checking spelling, so it'll check my corrections when I spell check, so I don't tell somebody to change a word to an incorrect spelling. And we also have the ability to include note content with fine change operations. So if I want to change something globally when I'm working with the text in the Story Editor, I can also do that for any of the notes that I have with that. And I have another one of those color boxes right here. You've seen enough of that, so we won't bother with that for the rest of this unit of our InDesign course. We already know if you hit it, like I say, right up here, we're chock full of colors when we're working with these settings in the Preferences dialog box. Let's go to the next layout and click on Track Changes. InDesign can work with a dedicated copy management tool that's known as InCopy. And there is the ability, as you're doing that work, to very quickly move content out to an editorial staff if you're working with a publication or a technical publishing unit, and then move that copy back directly back and forth between InDesign documents. But whether you do it like that or you're working with changes that are built within InDesign CS6 itself, you have the ability to track changes that are made to the document from previous versions where you've brought that out. So for example, it could show where text has been added since the document was last saved in a version, or deleted, or that text is moved. We can also prevent duplicate user colors. So if this has to go to review throughout an organization, everybody has to pick their own user color, and you can tell when you're looking at the InDesign document, and whatever the notes or changes have been made, the color will correspond with that person. Change bars option. This basically deals with that view for tracking our changes that we'll set up, and what it'll do is it'll give us a color for where that shows in those changes and where the location is for the left side margin, either when we're looking in the layout view or more importantly generally when we're working with that with the Story Editor display. And it'll also include deleted text when spell checking. So in this case, if there's something that was deleted, okay, and we want to bring it back, it'll take that and allow us to bring that back if we go backwards on that change with the correct spelling for it. Let's go to the last layout we're going to talk about in this unit of our InDesign CS6 course, and we're going to click on the Story Editor display layout. This has a number of options for the Story Editor, which is an executive word processor that's actually built inside InDesign CS6. What it does is it allows us to edit copy independently of editing it inside of an InDesign document layout file. So we're simply working with the text. We're not working with any of the arrangement of that text on your InDesign document page. We have options as we do that to select the fonts that we'd be working with, line spacing and text color and background, so we can see how that works specifically with that type. And we've got a little pictogram over here. So for example, if I take the text color and I change that to yellow, and I change that background from white to black, what we can do is we can see that text look like this when we're working with our story editor. We're going to change that back to our default settings too. First, bring the background to white, and then take the text color and bring that back to black and go back to our default settings. Now, if we don't want to set individual colors for that text and background, we have some themes that are defined. So I could say, for example, this is what it would look like if I was working with an amber monochrome monitor in the late 1980s. Actually, just like the example I showed you just a little bit ago. Or if I want to see it in a terminal view, where it turns that text to green. Once again, we'll go for the default, which was the ink on paper. Enable anti-aliasing basically talks about how the edges of the type characters you're working with are formed when you're working in the story editor. Enable anti-aliasing reduces the chance that little jaggies are going to show up when you're dealing with diagonal lines or you're dealing with rounded edges of your characters. Beneath that we have cursor options, and this basically allows me to see, again, just in the story editor display, not when you're working with your layouts. It allows me to see when I'm working with the cursor various options that I could choose for working with it, and I can also set the option for whether that cursor is going to blink or not, depending on my preferences when I'm working in the story editor and how it displays. In this unit of our InDesign CS6 course, we're going to discuss the options that are available under the Display Performance and Appearance of Black layout options, working within our Preferences dialog box. Let's start with Display Performance. Basically what this does is this allows us to set rules for how graphic elements and text elements are placed within our InDesign documents and how they show up on the screen. The first option that we have here is to set the default view that we see whenever we place an element inside of our InDesign documents. Typical uses a low resolution proxy to where you can see what that graphic is, but it doesn't show it exactly as it was created. High quality essentially would give you the option to select that in such a way that the moment you place it, it will allow you to see that in the best possible way it was, very much like the graphic was originally created. Fast is an even lower resolution option that I generally don't use. I will, as a rule, set that for typical, and when I have a specific need to see something in high quality, I actually have the option to set that independently for elements underneath my Object pull-down menu. I also have the ability here where it says Preserve Object Level Display Settings. If I check that box, whatever I set for this default view is going to be what I see for the option in the object. Since sometimes I do need to see something in high quality, I'll generally leave that options box unchecked. And then we have the ability to adjust view settings for those layouts and define, for example, what high quality would look like, or in relative terms, what that low resolution, which in this case is it's set, is simply to gray it out and not show any elements of transparency. We can move these sliders to kind of fine-tune what we see for those default views. If we're not happy with what's originally set within InDesign CS6, we can simply choose the custom settings we want and then a typical or high quality default view that we've got up above. We have the ability of that anti-aliasing. We talked about that, what that was before. And Greek type below 7 points. What that means is that if that type is smaller than 7 points at a certain display view of 100% or less, what will happen is it'll simply show as kind of a gray box as opposed to actually trying to draw the characters that go inside that small line of type. We can always, of course, very quickly return to the defaults by simply clicking on this Use Defaults button right here. Appearance of black. This deals with how black, or an absence of color, when we're talking in RGB terms, or rich black, which is a combination of cyan, magenta, yellow, and key color black colors, will appear on screen and will print when you output the file. Let's talk about how that works on screen. Rich black actually is an absence of color when we're looking on screen for RGB and grayscale devices. So as I sit there and I talk about printing black, I have the ability to say that as all blacks, or I could see that as blacks accurately as I'm working with that. So however that would be defined. The rich black is fine as we're working with it on screen because it gives us a really nice dark black color. And as you can see, that looks a little bit darker on most screens than the kind of grayish view that we have right over here. Printing and exporting. Now this is a different issue. We have the options once again to output all blacks as rich black or to output the blacks accurately as they're defined. Selecting rich black when you create that will turn black elements into a combination of cyan, magenta, yellow, and key color black. All 4 of those cartridges if you're running with a CMYK inkjet printer as an example. Selecting output all blacks accurately when you're working with that low resolution inkjet printer will simply use up the black cartridge to create that, so your color cartridges will last a little bit longer. That's how it works on the low end on the proofing side. On the high end, when you're dealing with process color printing and creating plates for a press run, say, of a 100,000 copy magazine, selecting that output all blacks accurately means that by default, when InDesign creates the separations that are built off that page or loads the information into the PDF that you create, it will use 100% black as opposed to automatically making that in cyan, magenta, yellow, and black, or a 4-color process printing of any black that you have on your pages. We have an overprinting of black, and in this case the overprinting of black swatch is at 100%. What that basically means is when we're printing in that cyan, magenta, yellow, and black, that the black is what will go on top. So it'll lay over the top of any colors. That keeps it from getting accidentally dulled if it runs in contrast to any color cartridges as you're working with your low-end proofing printer, or if you're dealing with process separations for high-quality offset printing like you would be with that 100,000 circulation magazine. In this, the last unit of Chapter 4 in our InDesign CS6 course, we're going to discuss the last 2 layouts that are available in our Preferences dialog box: the File Handling layout and the Clipboard Handling layout. Let's go to the File Handling layout, and we'll start there. At the top is a button that would allow me to navigate my way towards the Document Recovery Data folder. Now, as I put my cursor on that, it shows the tooltip that says it's in Users, Randy Hagen, and a number of subdirectories. Let me bring that back just a second. Ending finally in my InDesign Recovery folder. What this means is that if for some reason, say, my computer lost its plug, I accidentally kicked out the power, and my computer shut down, I would have a recovery file that was saved that deals with most all, if not all, of the commands that I had executed since the last time I saved it, or if I haven't saved it in the first place, to when I originally created the file. This is one of those reasons why I have you, when you're doing your exercises, save a file immediately after you create it so you have reference points to get back to that. Let's deal with the next section in our File Handling dialog box. saving InDesign files. The first options box listed is the number of recent items to display, and you'll notice it's set at 10. Now, you may remember when we started with the first unit of this InDesign course where I talked about in the welcome screen that it would list up to 10 files that had been opened since you opened the program underneath that open folder in your welcome screen. That's where this setting comes into play. You can make that larger or smaller as you see fit. We'll just leave it at the setting. Beneath that, we have the ability to always save preview images with documents. Basically what this means is that we have a proxy view that we can see when we're working with Windows Explorer, as we're dealing with the Windows platform, or we're dealing with Finder Windows when we're working on the Mac, that when I click just once on an InDesign document file, what it will do is it'll show a small proxy preview of, in this case, the first 2 pages, although I could set it to be larger if that's what I wanted to do. Or I can change the preview size to make it smaller or make it larger when I'm looking at that file in my icon views in either Windows or the Macintosh platforms. Snippet imports. Basically what this does is this deals with how we can take information that we bring in from a file, copy it or cut it when we're working with that, and it'll take that and position whatever that snippet is, either where my cursor is or an original location that corresponds to where it was laid out on a page before I had saved that snippet. We'll go for the cursor location by default because that gives us control for where we place those snippets when we put them in our InDesign documents. Beneath that, we have a set of checkboxes for dealing with links or files that we have placed in our InDesign document. We basically have 2 ways for those to be stored. One of them is that we can embed those elements, the text or graphics that we place inside our InDesign documents. That makes the file exceptionally large. What we want to do is we want to link, or for it to make a reference to where that file is stored. So when we're working on our own computers, we can have a smaller file size working with our InDesign document, and it knows where that's found on our systems. Or when we package them to be taken somewhere else, let InDesign know that it needs to collect those links wherever they're stored and save them in a single location for when we're going to package it and take it somewhere else, whether it's an archive in our computer or provide it to a printer halfway across town or halfway across the world for that matter. We have a number of options here. One of them is to check links before opening the document. So what will happen is when you open the InDesign document, if this checkbox is selected, InDesign will make a poll of all the linked elements that are tied to your InDesign document. And if any of them are missing or have been moved from where they were before, what it will do is it will alert you to that and allow you to fix that situation. The second thing it does, as we look at the second checkbox, is it allows us to find missing links before we open it. If we check it, InDesign will alert us if it can't find files linked from that document. The third option, create links when placing text in spreadsheet files. Primarily, by default, InDesign will simply create links to graphics. The text it brings in and will create as unlinked or independent pieces. So when you're working with InDesign, you don't have to have a link to those text or those spreadsheet files. However, if you want to know whether that file has been changed, you can check this option. And what it will do is the next time you open InDesign document, it will pull that linked text or spreadsheet file and immediately alert you once you open it whether that file has been changed since the last time you were working with that document. Finally, preserve image dimensions when relinking. What this does is it says that you may have scaled your graphic when it was placed into an InDesign document. Make it larger, make it smaller. By checking this checkbox, what InDesign will do is it will preserve however that image has been brought into the document. So when it's scaled in, it matches up to whatever scaling or transformation attributes you've applied to it when you placed it in that InDesign document. And finally, there's a default relink folder. And basically what this does is this tells me to look for the last place that graphic was when I relinked it or tied it to my InDesign document. Or it mandates that InDesign will have to find that in the original folder or computer location where it was stored, or it'll alert you and make you correct that. In this case, we'll go for the easier option, which is it was the last place we left it when we placed it in our InDesign document.